Good morning and welcome to the VIP seat. Today is February 6th, and our top news stories in business aviation this week include the Trump tariff threats and how that could be impacting the industry, as well as some new updates happening at Gulfstream and Safran. Your hosts today include yours truly, Jessie Naor, and our co-host today is Nathan Winkle. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Jesse. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to being able to be in the VIP seat with you for a while. So thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
No, back in the day, I think I was the first podcast I was ever on was your podcast, Jet Blast.
Yeah, good old Jet Blast. You know, it may make a comeback, to be
There we go.
determined. So,
I'm all about it. Let me know.
yeah.
I'm subscribing. All right, folks, sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. So the first thing I want to do today, we're a business aviation news show. We're not an aviation safety commentary show, but obviously we have to say prayers and our thoughts are with the families of the victims of the crashes last week. Not only the commercial airline crash, but also, this medevac flight that happened. It's very near and dear to our hearts. And, we even know there are people in our community that were on those aircraft that lost their lives. I will say, I know there's a GoFundMe for one of them. I will post the link to that when I release this, but we're not going to speculate. But we just did want to acknowledge the victims and we're sending our thoughts and prayers to them.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. I think that's very appropriate. Yeah, it's a sad day for the whole industry.
Yeah, it's affected everybody. And, as painful as these situations are, with any luck, it will help us move forward and will help us focus more on safety, which we're always focused on. But I think in these times, just a little bit more and a little more sensitive to things. So,
That's exactly right.
yeah, very tough. All right. Well, with that, we'll run to the normal show. So the big news this week on Monday, it was pretty wild. The whole weekend and Monday morning convalesced into this crazy day. But the Trump tariffs have been rocking every industry, but I don't think people realize just how critical these tariffs could be in private aviation specifically, maybe general aviation as well. But we're talking about tariffs on flight simulators from CAE, Pratt & Whitney engines,
Mhm.
which we already have supply chain issues with. The list just goes on of the critical parts, components, and manufacturing that happens overseas. So there's a pause for now for 30 days, and here's hoping we
Yeah.
get some relief from this. But what are you hearing? Because I know your customers have to be asking about this.
Yeah, it's you mentioned several that are folks that are affected, CAE, Bombardier, Safran is another one, right? They do a lot of landing gear for some of the Bombardier products. Certainly Pratt, but Rolls-Royce Canada also, let's not forget about that, right? That's a huge thing. And to be determined, how all that's going to play out, right? I think, who knows if maybe it's just a play to, if they're our 51st state, I guess it really wouldn't matter. Well, it was a big state, but it's kind of weird. But anyway, look, I think that the tariff thing is a real deal. And it's certainly going to influence anybody ordering an airplane. The order books right now, without getting into detail by model, at Bombardier specifically, we're a couple of years out. So if you're signing up, if there's this tit for tat trade wars right now, I think if I'm a buyer, or one of my clients that's a buyer, I'm really going to have to think long and hard, that we're on some firm footing before I pull that trigger to order. Because even if we resolve this tariff issue um, amicably now, who's to say it won't come back, in a year, 2 years, and right at delivery day? So yeah, it's a tough question. It's definitely going to have an impact, I feel like, on U.S. orders from Bavard.
Yeah. And it's not just even Canadian manufacturers. Bell helicopters, they're made in Canada. They have been for 35 years, actually, which I did not
Yeah,
realize was
exactly.
so long. And a lot of people are like, well, this is just Trump, kind of he does this. He goes up there, he makes a big statement, and then he rolls back. Like that's his negotiation
Sure.
style. But to be fair, he has talked a lot about manufacturing jobs coming back to the United States.
That's right.
And I think he realizes how much aviation is made just across the border. I wouldn't just count out the fact that he may do other things in the future to encourage that to come back to the US. I could see him wanting our airplanes made in the US. I can see
Yeah.
that being a push.
Well, and I think, we all know there's not that many OEMs, right, that are building business jets right now, right? We're down to, I think the top five, right, big players, or top six, and three of those are outside the U.S., right? We've got Dassault, we've got Embraer, and we've got Bombardier, right? So, there's talk of EU tariffs, and then what happens, I'm eventually sure Brazil comes into the conversation. So,
Mhm.
look, luckily the Phenoms are built down in Melbourne, but the rest of, if you buy a Praetor, you might be in for a little bit of a surprise here. And again, if you got one on order, what does that mean? Right? Like,
Right.
because we're 2.5 years out on all those airframes. So what
Yeah.
does it mean?
I don't know.
So
We need to
I
get
would,
an attorney on the show to talk about is that force majeure if your cost just went up
oh
25%? I
yeah,
don't
that's a
know.
great question for sure, because that leaves you, your only options. And I know we have something coming up we're talking about in a minute, but that leaves your only options, Gulfstream and Textron, really, at this point, I mean,
And even that, I mean, components, very
hmm
critical,
oh yeah.
expensive components. I mean, the engines alone are, hold most of the value of the asset. Those engines
Yeah.
are not being
And
made here.
and and look, don't forget about our friends down south, right? So Mexicali, Mexico, every OEM that I know of in North America that builds airplanes have components that are manufactured in Mexicali, Mexico. Wire harnesses, Gulfstream, wire harnesses for their airplanes are made in Mexicali. They have a huge component repair facility down there and component manufacturing facility. There's all, Honeywell. There's several people that have facilities for whatever reason in Mexicali. It's
Yeah.
going to be a real punch in the arm to, I think, our industry generally. Prices are undoubtedly going to have to go up to cover this.
I don't know. Maybe people will transition back to American planes, but they can't produce enough.
Yeah, who knows?
Like whatever we do, I hope that this just is a very slow roll because, this 25% that just came out, I mean, that was like panic. What do we do?
Yeah, what a kick in the teeth, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's not,
Yeah, it is.
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for sure. I mean, time's going to be the answer here, right? And there's certainly some posturing and some hot air, but look, your question initially was what are buyers saying? And at the end of the day, I think if you're representing a buyer of a new business jet, or you're representing a flight department that's getting parts and services out of Canada, you need to be, or Mexico for that matter, you need to be very aware of how that could affect your bottom line.
Yeah. No. And yeah, be prepared, do the research, figure out where
That's right.
your parts and components are coming from, engines,
Yep.
landing gear. I mean, there's so many critical parts. So I know the DOs, aircraft management companies and brokers out there, they got a little more work on their hands probably the next couple months figuring all this
Indeed.
stuff out.
Indeed. Everybody's watching.
Yeah. Well, speaking of engines, Safran actually came out with a really cool announcement this week.
Hmm.
So everyone's been working on, electric motors and engines for the burgeoning eVTOL industry and just general electrification of aircraft. And the first electric motor of this type and capability has actually been certified by EASA. So that's
Hmm.
great news
That's
for
awesome.
them. We don't know about the battery power part of it yet, but at least we've got the engine to power it. That's great news.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the question for this, right, for me is I'm pretty pumped up about the hydrogen power
Mhm.
solution, because I think from like an infrastructure, and in your previous life as an operator, right? Like, I think of an infrastructure and ease of converting my FBOs or my locations where my owners are at. I think it'll be easier going to a hydrogen solution just logistically. I mean, charging stations. I'm a big fan of the whole buy aerospace thing. I think that's super cool. And I think that's a great way to train. But I think infrastructure is going to become the key to be able to support that, just like it was when Tesla started out, right? Like the limiting factor early on was lack of superchargers. So, if somebody's willing to make the investment and come out and set up charging stations at all these FBOs, then maybe it becomes a thing. But yeah, then we've got batteries and we've got weight and we've got a whole bunch of conversations to have. So,
It's that's the thing with aviation. Like as soon as you get like one little piece done, you got like the 10 other pieces that have to all work out.
well, for sure.
it's
And it's like
it's never
eVTOL,
simple.
right? We talked about that for years, and the NBAA's talked about it, right? And we've seen companies come and go, right? And some would
Mhm.
say that some of them are Ponzi schemes and whatever. But some, obviously there's a legit desire for that to happen, but it
Yes.
comes down consistently to an infrastructure problem. Like, how do we get power on top of buildings in Dallas, Texas, to be able to support this concept, or in Dubai, or
Yes.
wherever it might be, to make this work? And I think infrastructure again is the only limit. But it is interesting and it is encouraging that we have power plant now. So we
Hmm.
just got to go on to the next step.
I mean, that's where it starts. And I think too, like you're saying, the trainers, I mean, this could unlock a lot of potential for aircraft
Yeah,
training. It could reduce the cost
absolutely.
potentially of aircraft training. I love that. The
Yeah,
pipistrel, I can never say it right.
yeah,
Those
yeah,
electric aircraft, I mean, I think makes a ton of sense, not only for, the noise reduction over
yeah.
neighborhoods, so people don't complain about the kids that are flight training outside. But also they could build the infrastructure. A school could have their own station, their own power. The model works a
Sure.
little better for that. We'll have to
Are
see
you a
about.
pilot, Jesse? I can't remember. I think I've asked you this before.
So I have 20 hours, but
Yeah.
no, I'm
So we're in
not
the
a
same
commercial
boat.
pilot.
So I got to tell you, we're in the same boat. We're in the same place, right? So pilot wise, I don't know how I would feel though. Like I think the bi aerospace airplane's super cool as an example, right? But I've often wondered, like, how weird is that going to be where all you hear is the wind coming by the aircraft and whatever's coming off the prop? I don't know if I could, I don't know. I don't know.
Hey, it's maybe like gliding. Have you ever been in a
I guess,
glider? It's pretty
yeah,
quiet.
maybe, I guess. I have to make it like some of the hybrid cars, like my son's girlfriend has this little hybrid thing and it
Yeah.
whistles when it backs up, right? And maybe we have to make it whistle.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I never caught the flying bug. I went to air traffic control school. That's where I kind of started.
That's right.
And as a requirement of my program, we had to do ground school, we had to do instrument
I
school. Like
got you.
we went through all the motions and I did, the flight
I get it.
the flights to go through it, but it just never really like I was like, I mean, it's cool, but it just seems like a
Yeah.
really expensive hobby at the time.
Yeah, and it's one of those. It's sort of like golf, right? Like you have to do it all the time to be good at it, and I
Yeah.
don't have time for golf or flying airplanes.
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't have time for it.
Well, and honestly, if Cirrus, if the prices ever came down on the 22s, then maybe I've told my
Well,
husband,
that's
if we
right.
get one of those, then maybe I'll bother
Yeah,
to
yeah.
finish
I
the
hear you, man.
process.
I hear you.
But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I know there's already customers signed up for the aircraft. You've got you've got Electra, Diamond
Hmm.
Aircraft.
Hmm.
I also wonder too, some of these eVTOL companies, as they're realizing the complexity, maybe they'll start to go outsourcing their power plant. Some of them have talked about doing everything in house, but if you have a really good option to just slap onto the aircraft, maybe that's the way you need to go.
Yeah, and look, the whole do everything. I mean, we all know that doesn't work. Like just generally, I mean,
Very
it
tough.
seldom works, right? I mean, you wind up with some proprietary widget that can't be gotten anywhere, and and people can't work on it or train on it or whatever. I think it buy some things on the shelf,
Yeah. Yeah.
make it
They
easier.
may be I see some press releases in our like 30 to 60-day
Yeah,
future
I
potentially.
think.
Well, we do have a story later on in the show about a passenger taking mushrooms and jumping on an aircraft, which I cannot wait to talk about.
Yeah,
But before we get there, we do have more stories in the OEM space. So Gulfstream, they had their Q4 earnings recently. Didn't deliver as many aircraft as they expected in Q4 for the year. They were supposed to deliver 150. They ended up at 136, but they had a 36% jump in sales. So
yeah.
it feels like the same story across the board with all the OEMs. They're trying to build and they're trying to meet the capacity and the demand, but it's just challenging. Supply chain, employees, everything.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think with Gulfstream, it's a little different maybe than the others. As we said before the show started, I'm a reformed Gulfstreamer myself from a previous life. And admittedly, at my firm now, we don't do as many Gulfstream deals as we do other OEM deals, not by design, just by happenstance, right? But I
Mhm.
will say, if you look at the main difference I see in the OEM space is that Gulfstream has been out developing new products, right? And if you compare that to some of the others, we've refreshed products. I hope I don't hurt your feelings by saying y'all didn't develop new products, but you refreshed existing ones. And Gulfstream's been out doing some clean sheet stuff. And look, that's going to, especially thanks to our friends up in the Pacific Northwest, we now have higher scrutiny to get airplane certified. Maybe we should have all along, right? But
Mhm.
I think those timelines have certainly impacted Gulfstream. I mean, we know that for a fact that it impacted. I think Phoebe Novak said that in her earnings report. I watched it, and she said something to the effect that the one of the biggest headwinds for them in the past year was G700 certification and slower than because of some of this FAA scrutiny, and again, probably should have always been there. But I think the sales jump is more about Look, they've got some products that are really interesting, right? Now, we can debate price point for the cabin class, right, all day long, but I think, the G400, which is, yet to enter service, but very interesting, a cabin class, that's with the Challenger 650 and the Falcon 2000 that is largely stagnant right now and has
Mhm.
been for years, right? So I think the G400 is really interesting. I think it's expensive, candidly, but I think it's interesting. The 500, 600, 700, and now the 800 that's in flight test, all those things, I mean, those are fresh new looks. Yeah, they still have oval windows and they still have a Gulfstream logo on the data plate, but I think that's the reason you're seeing sales spike at Gulfstream.
Yeah.
I don't think it's, that their airplanes are any better. I think people are desperate for something new.
Hmm.
And I think they're desperate to, embrace some technology. And that's the main reason. And eventually there'll be a G300. Nobody really wants to talk about what's happening with the G280, but something has to happen in that space, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
again, I think that's going to keep running the order book for Gulfstream for a little while because they've invested a ton of money in aircraft
Well, and
development.
and candidly, I've never operated Gulfstream, but I mean, the thing I have
Mhm.
heard is that parts supply chain much better, support much better. I mean, have you heard that from buyers in the past as well? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, everybody has parts problems, right? And so,
Hmm.
I mean, we all get parts from, sorry, Honeywell. We all get parts from Honeywell, right? Or we all get parts
Hmm.
from Collins, or we all get parts from Safran, and those individual suppliers have their own headwinds and challenges. I do
Right.
think that, having when I worked at Gulfstream, I assume they still do it this way, but I think one of the things they do or did do, and probably still do, a very good job at is they hold the suppliers accountable, like truly in a report card. Like back in the day, they used to get a report card and it was red, green, or yellow, right? On how they were, how the suppliers were performing both on the production side and the in-service side. And I
Hmm.
think, holding them accountable in that way is, and, maybe the others do it and I'm just ignorant to it. But I will say, that's one thing that I think Gulfstream does better. But my point was, we all get our parts from the same suppliers,
Right.
and that's where the challenges are. The OEMs themselves, they can build an airplane, every one of them can, and they can provide their own OEM parts relatively
Hmm.
quickly. But these supplier provided parts are where we get hung up, right?
Yeah.
Especially if we're going to
Well,
have tariffs.
yeah. Some better than others on their own
Yeah.
parts, but I won't go there.
Yeah, well,
Although
that's
I
right.
do welcome any OEMs that want to come on the show and talk about how great their parts programs are. You are
Oh,
welcome
yeah.
to
Can I
come
just
on.
be there to help with that? I'll co-host with you. How's that?
We have some questions, but like it's so many different industries. It's not just us;
Yeah.
it's everybody. But fortunately, it seems like you listen to earnings calls for everybody, and it is alleviating. It's not solved, but
Yeah.
we are in a
Yeah.
much better place now than we were, even a year ago. So that's
Yeah, and I'm kind
positive.
of over the whole supply chain has become a crutch, though. I will say that with a lot of people, and I'm generally the guy in the room who has no problem calling BS, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes on the supply chain crutch. I mean, sometimes it's just poor management, right? Poor operation management or poor production management, and
Hmm.
unfortunately, we have this ability to use this crutch of supply chain, and I just you got to show me, right? I'm a
And
show
it's
me guy,
money.
so
It's money.
yeah,
Look, everybody's trying to, you keep more parts on the shelf, your inventory costs go up.
that's right,
I get that, but it's like you have to have the right balance of customer support versus how much you're going to keep in inventory
100%.
versus how much you're just completely outsourcing to only one supplier versus multiple suppliers. Like there's management and there's differences in management techniques for all of these OEMs. And
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I started writing an article back before the holiday break, and I need to finish it. It's overdue to my friends over at Global Air. Shout out to those guys. But and the title of the article is essentially that just in time doesn't work for on-demand business aviation, right? Just in time doesn't work on demand. So, but we're all at mercy of the suppliers again, and we can only do so much. But we'll see. Hopefully that'll be out one of these days. I'll finish writing that.
let us know. We're happy to promote it. We want to see it.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Alrighty, well, next story. Starlink has been kind of taking over the business aviation space. It's a great product. Obviously, Gogo Galileo is also launching. Everyone's getting into this world. The Europeans are a little uncomfortable with the American dominance of space right now, understandably. I think we're doing pretty good on that front. So they're attempting to, the same way they got together to face Boeing and they created Airbus many years
Mhm.
ago, they're now doing the same thing to kind of create, this competitive rocket slash communications group. So they're trying to put together Thales, Leonardo, and seeing if they can compete. I don't know. It could go one of two ways. This has sometimes worked. Obviously, Airbus worked out really, really well for Europe, and that collaboration was huge, but we tried it in the US as well when we launched United Launch Alliance. We made
Mhm.
Lockheed and Boeing work together, and it didn't work out so well. It was very costly and just failed, but not completely, but way
Yeah.
more expensive than private entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I when you ahead of this show, you shared this story with me, and I was reading it, and it's the thing that struck me the most is the author of the article you shared. It says the title of the article is "Europe has the worst imaginable idea to counter SpaceX launch dominance." It's kind of interesting that folks are already super down on it. It will
Yeah.
be, it will be interesting. I think, the satellite piece that'll probably come to fruition, but I bet you they're winding up using SpaceX rockets before it's over with. I mean, it's kind of hard to compete. It's sort of like Google, right? If there's something already in the space doing it better than everybody else, why waste the money reinventing that, right? I mean, why not export some SpaceX rockets to Europe, right? And let's just keep going. But yeah, I do think that if, 10 years too late for EASA
Right. Yeah, maybe you should
or
have started on
whatever the
this like
group
20
is.
years ago.
Yeah, yeah. They talk about behind, man. Like, whew, goodness.
Yeah. Well, I look, and like SpaceX is not the only game in town anymore. Blue
Yeah,
Origin, like theirs is
sure.
almost up and running. Now, I think some of this, I do understand it from, a sovereign group of nations wanting to be able to compete. I
Have
get
you
that,
followed
but
that Strato launcher thing at all? That big old airplane out in Mojave that was, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. He was part of Microsoft early on, and he's got
uh,
that big Strato launcher, it's like six engines and two fuselages, and they launch the spacecraft from in between. You got
oh
to
no, I
check
need to
that
check
thing
that out.
out.
Oh, it's
It's the
fascinating.
biggest
I'd love to.
airplane that's ever flown. It's really pretty cool. You'll have to check that out. But that's another one
Yeah.
that's become viable. They've been dropping some
Mhm.
payload from it, so it's kind of interesting.
There's, it's a really cool time. I'm glad to see space is like, back at it again, but
Yeah.
it takes some serious money. I mean, the only people playing in the space doing well are billionaires, that
Yeah,
just have
absolutely.
unlimited money.
It's interesting, like if you watched any things around the inauguration, there's talk about going to Mars or whatever. I'm like, shouldn't we just see if we can get back to the moon first? Anyway, it'd
Right.
be interesting. I mean, great to have big goals. I'm definitely a believer in that. But man, I think we gotta we gotta
Yeah.
walk before or crawl before we can walk. Sorry.
I can't tell you how many of those memes I've sent with Elon's face this week.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah,
That was fun. But you know what? Good for him. He's created something cool and everybody wants to do their own version of it. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I know
yeah,
Airbus worked out. Maybe the Europeans are better at collaboration than our companies. Maybe they have a
maybe
different culture that works. I don't know.
time will tell.
Time will tell. All right. But here is the most important story of the week.
Man, people are weird, or they're
I
feral,
just
I think is what I
they
would
are.
choose.
All right, let me read the whole thing out because I mean it's just unbelievable. Vermont passenger Stephen Shaw, I think private jet passenger, we don't know who he was flying on, was accused of trying to kiss a flight attendant, spit on a pilot while armed and high on mushrooms, and was arrested by Port Authority cops in Teterboro Airport. He was hit with a slew of charges, including assault and criminal trespassing, after allegedly storming the tarmac with his two small dogs in tow, according to law enforcement sources. How does this
I
keep
mean, just
happening?
getting a visual of that, like that, just getting a visual of those words, like there's got to be video somewhere. I mean, come on, man, there's gotta be.
Yeah. Well, I just don't understand too. How do these what he was a private jet passenger, so I guess he was already there waiting for
Yeah, he must
another
have got off of
aircraft.
another airplane. Maybe I don't. I mean, how in the heck did he get out on the ramp? Like,
Right. How did he get out there? Yeah, maybe he walked off of one and went to another. There's so many unanswered questions I have in this story. He was in the bathroom apparently barricading himself. He didn't want to come out. He told the officers he was going to kill them. He was armed, by the way, also had a gun. And
Good gravy.
they got him out of the bathroom half naked, but nonetheless, they did secure him.
Man.
And what happened to the dogs? Where are the dogs?
Yeah, where are the dogs? Where are the dogs?
The
Exactly
most
right.
important
I
piece of
mean,
this.
I mean, it's all kind of funny, but it's also sad, man. Mental health is such a thing, and
Yeah.
good grief. I mean,
I'm, I mean, it was
hopefully everybody's
mushrooms.
okay, right, out of this, but I mean, what is wrong?
I
I
don't
could go
know.
on
And
and
all
on.
these crazy stories are involving mushrooms specifically. I'm like, why is this becoming so mainstream? Yeah, but security, I mean, you would think a place, like Teterboro, again, that's pretty high security. I mean, you
Yeah, it
can't
is.
even
I
get
mean,
through the gates unless you have the tail number and they have your name. Like that one's
and
pretty
even then,
locked
it's
down.
difficult.
Yeah.
I was a passenger recently on an airplane, actually, the airplane I'm sitting in right now, on an airplane in Teterboro, and we left for about an hour, and I came back, and I mean, even with my crew there, I couldn't hardly get out of Atlantic Aviation. It's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
bizarre, actually.
Yeah.
So
Well, I guess when you're
anyway.
high, you just find a way.
Man, I don't know. Either that or, it could have been one of those times when it's super busy. Like I know you've seen that before. You get in some of these, high
True.
density airports with FBOs that are just rocking and rolling, and it could have just popped out there on the ramp really easy. And I don't know. And I mean, if you're wagging around a couple of dogs and acting half crazy, I mean, that unfortunately that is some of the passengers that we'll see coming and going. That's
That's kind of
a
par for the
fact.
course sometimes.
Man, mushrooms, interesting.
Mushrooms. But
Yeah.
the other thing I did want to say, there was an announcement this week too that FlexJet just bought $8 billion worth
Oh
of
yeah, I saw that
Embraer
this morning.
aircraft.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have
yeah,
too much on the story yet, but that's a lot of airplanes. I think 182 was in the order.
yeah. Look, I mean, to that point, here's the one thing I think we probably both agree on. Our buddies down in Melbourne and Sao Paulo, they better get ready. I mean, we've got a book of NetJet airplanes coming. I've got clients that are buying. I know other broker dealers have clients that have ordered new airplanes, and now we've got FlexJet back in the mix ordering some more. Y'all need to get ready for us.
Get ready and stock those parts.
That's right. That's right. That's
We
right.
want those. We
That's
want
right.
those parts. Although I will say, there's got to be some really good opportunities right now. I'm hearing of lots of companies that are stocking landing gear, engines,
Hmm.
overhauling those parts and components. There's a whole new burgeoning industry around that
Yeah.
supply chain that's really growing, which I think is great. And
And
we're
you know
going to
what's
have to have that.
wild is an airplane near and dear to you, the Phenom 300s, right? I'm starting to see some of those getting parted out already, which is kind of wild that we're already at that point. It's man, I don't know. I feel like just last week it was Christmas 2023, and somehow it's almost Valentine's Day at 25. I don't know what happened.
Well, we love
Gosh,
it.
here.
And things are moving and
Yep.
grooving. It's you guys are busy. Lots of new time buyers
Yeah,
I've heard.
yeah, it's been a huge blessing for Thoroughbred. We had fourth quarter was great. It was a little slow start. I think that was the universal sentiment for most brokers that the fourth quarter had a little slower start, but once it started, it was rolling. I mean, we were pretty consistent, I think, starting mid-year last year through the end of the year, but there was like at the beginning of the fourth quarter, like, wait a minute, what's happening here? And maybe it was a little election anxiety, I don't know, but
Mhm.
definitely since the first of the year, we've seen some first time owners coming out of the woodwork. Luckily, unlike during COVID, these folks are focused on light jets, good entry level platforms, whereas in COVID, we bought a couple of first time aircraft owners G550s, right? Which was like kind of wild. That's a big jump, big bite. But now we're seeing people, be more intentional and methodical about their purchases. But yeah, we're grateful that folks are encouraged. The biggest thing that would help if anybody in DC listens to your show is we need bonus depreciation back. So let's get cracking on that.
I
We
think
have
it's
several
coming.
people sitting on the sidelines waiting for that very thing. I think we'll see a big rush.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been doing anything the last 2 weeks, so I don't know why they haven't gotten on it yet.
And there's been nothing going on. Not a thing.
There's been nothing
Yeah, not a
happening.
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm
Yeah,
thinking we'll see it soon.
interesting.
But I don't know if we'll even see it in the news because there's too many things coming at us to even keep track of.
Yeah,
So
there's
we'll
so
see.
much. I mean, that is right. I don't watch a lot of news. I'm a podcast and I read my news, right? I'm kind of guy, and I usually do that all early in the morning. But man, there is so much now like going on. It is hard to keep up with everything that's happening, and it's happening fast.
It is. So keep your eyes out and keep listening to the VIP seat so you know what's going on. There was that perfect plug. All right. With that, we're going to wrap the pod today because we like to keep it short and sweet. Make sure you get everything you need to know. It's really a curated show where we try to get everything at you fast and quick. We also have an email newsletter that does the same thing. It's all the stories in 3 sentences or less. So thank you for joining us. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the VIP seat.